Welcome to We Question and Learn. This is your host, Tom Pies. We're celebrating 20 years here on the air at WQLN FM 91.3. And we're also on NPR One and about a dozen or more other podcasts. We keep discovering new venues. I'm not sure how it happens, but we thank you, the listeners and the fine supporters that make this program possible. I am very proud and very happy today to have a guest that I've been thinking about for many, many years because I'm an avid fan. So I'm going to disclaim that as we get into the interview. I have Robert Lawrence Kuhn on the phone, and greetings. Thank you for being here.
Tom, it's a pleasure. We're great partners with WQLN and appreciate you broadcasting our show and looking forward to our conversation.
I think when people watch the program, and I know they appreciate it because I hear this from our members and constituents, you're the executive producer, you're the writer, you're the host. You probably did most of the arrangements to get on PBS over the years. Can you give me an insight how this came to be? What provoked you to do a program? And two, how did you get on PBS?
Well, it is a long story, but as friends and colleagues over the years, we'll go through it. I guess I start with saying I've always had a passion for the big ideas of human consciousness. That was my primary interest as a young person in college. And I did my PhD in neuroscience as part of that thinking. But then, due to the exigencies of life and who knows what else, having to pay for the kids' schooling, I didn't continue as a scientist, which was the original plan, or a medical doctor, but went into business and did various other things that, it's always better to be lucky than smart, as I said, and I was pretty lucky in investment banking. But I always followed the field of neuroscience and always wanted to go back to dealing with the big questions of life. Let's see, how many years would it have been? It would have been almost 30 years later after getting my doctorate. I was able to have this vision to do a program that would deal with the biggest questions that relate to both science and philosophy. The original idea was focused on the mind. It was called, before it was on the air, it was called Mind Quest, and the subtitle was The Closest You'll Get to Truth About These Scientific and Philosophical Topics. And I talked to some people at PBS, and some were interested and some were not. And it turned out there was one small station in Southern California that wanted to take a chance. And, I was maybe known as an author and in various categories, but I had never done television. So I was, an unknown. So this station, it was KOCE at the time. It's now PBS SoCal in Southern California. Took a chance and ran a season. But the manager, his name was Mel Rogers, the president of the station, didn't like the title. He didn't like Mind Quest. And he said, well, what is this show about? And I gave him the subtitle. I said, this is the closest you'll get to truth. It's sort of the way of thinking. Not that it is the truth, but it's the closest you'll get, and it may be a process. And he said, well, that's the title, Closer to the Truth. And I said, no, it can't be the, because it's not the. I'm not that crazily arrogant. It's a process. So let's take out the closer to truth. And, it was like a 30-second conversation, and it was done. And that title has been with us for 25 years almost. And it has really been great. The way we had, for years, we had three categories of topics, and we called them Cosmos, which deals with the universe, physics, mathematics, the high focus on cosmology, the nature of the universe and new discoveries and what they mean, not as a science report of the latest discoveries, but rather the implications, what it would mean for human understanding. Second category we call consciousness, which deals with brain, mind, personal identity, artificial intelligence, alien intelligences, even some ESP here and there, all the things that have to do with mental activity. And the third category is called meaning, and it is the core based on philosophy of religion. It's not sectarian religion, but it's dealing with questions about existence of God. If there is a God, what's the nature of God? The relationship between science and religion. All of the questions in a non-sectarian way. And we feature, theists and atheists almost in equal proportion, and really try to get the best thinking out of everyone. What I'm really pleased about is that starting about 2 years ago, we began a focus in that category for non-Western religions. We had a very high skew towards Western religions, Judeo-Christian philosophers, mainly Christian philosophers, because a lot of very good philosophy is done in the Christian tradition, always has been. But with the internationalization, we really wanted to bring in more. We had some Islamic philosophers, and many scientists were Hindus, and so they represented that. But it wasn't a real thorough approach, and we've done that now. And in fact, literally right now, the first broadcasts are being broadcast of Eastern traditions and big questions, and it's a focus on Hinduism, Buddhism, and Chinese religion. And coming up soon will be global philosophy of religion. It's not on the air yet, but it's in process, working on the scripts right now, and that will focus a lot on Islam. So we're really pleased to enlarge the same thinking, though, not about the religions themselves. Other people can do that, but on the philosophical implications. So, that's the overview. Closer to Truth is the name. We have no claims to be the truth. Mm-hmm. Some people complain about that, by the way. They say, we're frustrated. We want to know the truth. And I'm saying, well, I'm sorry. I don't have the truth.
I had you down for 280 programs, and I think you're going to correct me. It's more like over 300?
Yeah, actually, you're not wrong, because since 2008, in the new format, we have had 280 up until December. I think we had a new series on. We're adding a new category, by the way, and it started in December, called Life. So now, instead of being cosmos, consciousness, meaning, it's the three big categories. Now 4. Cosmos, life, consciousness, meaning. So 4, and the first life series was on philosophy of biology, which is very exciting. Very pleased to develop that. And so we're probably literally now 285. We have the new series on Eastern religions, which makes it 290. Mm-hmm. But what those don't count was the original series that were roundtables, different format, from 2000 and 2003, and collectively we did 43. So we were at 280. We're right now at 290, but then we add the original ones of 43. So that gets us right now to roughly 333 or something like that. So you're not wrong, because the current format has had 280 until very recently, when we've added the 2 new series on philosophy of biology, which was started in December, and Eastern religions and global philosophy of religion, which will be more and more of those shows will be broadcast in the next year and a half.
So people can appreciate your efforts. You are on 200 PBS stations?
Yep. It's roughly 200. They rotate. Sometimes the stations are in pledge, so they're off the air for a month or so, and then they come back. And it is, it's great. So it's always averaged about 200, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little less. I always say the times we're on are not necessarily prime time, because we don't have cat videos, but we're pleased that we have the shelf space, the airtime on PBS stations like WQLN, which is a great partner of ours. And so, we're very happy to be on the air. If it's 6:30 in the morning or 1:30 at night or 1:30 in the morning, we're just as pleased to be on the air with our topic, to bring it to people who are really interested. And again, we appreciate everyone who has given us the support of their interest over the years.
Now, with all this under your belt, you have published over 30 books. The titles go on and on here. When do you have time to write?
Well, I'm literally writing all the time.
Okay.
because it's what I love to do. I love it. Sometimes it's under pressure, of course. And some of the books are edited books of other people's works. The two Closer to Truth books that I've done in the past were based on the earlier seasons, and they were basically transcripts of the shows. But when I say that, that sounds very easy. But I found out that it was even harder than writing your own book, because you have to edit it very carefully, because if you hear an expert talk, it makes eminent sense. But when you see an exact transcript of the same material,
Hmm.
it makes no sense, because the grammar is not perfect, the order is different, you don't see the inflection. And so you have to do a very careful edit to maintain the style and content, of course, of the original, but make it understandable. So that's been part of the process. I've written on other subjects in my. They're not just science and philosophy topics. They are on other aspects that I have done in over the years, in the early years, on business and finance and things like that. And China's been an area of my other world, but Closer to Truth and everything there is my love. And I'll tell you one inside secret, which I know nobody really knows yet. But for the last 8, 10 months, I've had a very intense focus on consciousness,
Hmm.
and I've written what is equivalent to a book, but it's going to be published in a scientific magazine, a very technical science magazine, but it'll be available for the public as well, and it's called The Landscape of Consciousness, and it gives all the different ideas and explanations that have been given about what is consciousness, from a neurobiological point of view, from a philosophical point of view, from a religious point of view, all in one place. So it's really been my major effort, and I'm going to be continuing writing on that nature. And it articulates nicely with the writing the scripts for the shows. It's really been a wonderful opportunity to deal with these topics that have really been my kind of obsession throughout life. It's not as glamorous as it might seem. It's
Hmm.
literally thousands of hours, at night, worrying about words and being sure that they are properly as good as you can. Never perfect, of course. But to properly, my first more than a goal, responsibility, is to be sure to represent the roughly 500 interviewees who I've done over the years, and to
Hmm.
properly represent their ideas in the best possible way. And many of them are contradictory, and it doesn't mean I agree with them, but I have a responsibility to make sure that their views are presented as accurately and honestly as possible.
I'd like to touch on the Kuhn Foundation. I don't think people have heard much about it. No offense to you. I don't think you promote it on the program, but it seems to be an important part of your life. Would you like to talk about that for a minute?
Sure. It's a very simple story. When I sold my business, which was a merger and acquisition business, in the year 2000, 2001, it wasn't by today's standards, it wasn't the huge amounts of money that you had. But I spent with a partner 12 years building that, and very hard times. And eventually it was successful. We were able to sell it. And I took a portion of the proceeds, maybe, I don't know, 25% of it, and put it into what would be considered a very small foundation, which we call the Kuhn Foundation, because I had the image that I could I wanted to do something in the area of brain, mind, and cosmology. I didn't have the Closer to Truth vision when we created it, specifically, but I had the general feeling that I wanted to do something. So, as opposed to It was the usual when an entrepreneur sells a business, you buy a, expensive sports car or a boat or, jewelry or whatever to celebrate. I didn't do any of that. Don't have any of those things, but put what would be considered a very small foundation into this foundation, and the object of it would be to promote some of the ideas that we're talking about. And literally a year or two later, the opportunity for Closer to Truth began, and so the Kuhn Foundation, the vast majority of its activities over the now 25 years has been to support Closer to Truth. We have had other supporters as well, but the large majority of the funding has come from the Kuhn Foundation, and I, of course, have never, in 25 years, and I don't know how many tens of thousands of hours devoted, I never taken any salary or compensation whatsoever, but have helped support it for what is my life passion.
Before we go too far, you are a renowned China expert, and I had to go to Wikipedia to learn that, although that's a very important and prominent part of your life and your credentials. How did that all start? You were into China, so to speak, before I think the world really figured it out? Am I close?
And I take no credit for that. It was what I call the capriciousness of the world. I am very passionate about the work I've done in China, but it is very different than Closer to Truth. Those are my two worlds, Closer to Truth world and China. And they're very different in the sense that Closer to Truth is, as I've said, a life passion. It began when I was literally a teenager, mid-teenager, and has not diminished over the years. China, I had no interest in. There was no whatsoever. I didn't study Chinese. I didn't study Oriental anything. I mean, I was involved in investment banking in the U.S. and no China. But in 1988, 1989, one of my U.S. mentors that I had worked with in sort of science, public policy, which I was working on at the time, had a close friend who was at that time the science minister of China, and they were looking for investment bankers who were literate in science to help China with its early reforms. Remember, this is the late 1980s, and reform had started in the late 1970s. And by the late 1980s, there had been a lot of reform, but none in the science industries. As I put it at the time, a science industry was like a university, a research institute, a manufacturing company, a kindergarten, and a cemetery, all in the same organization. And they wanted to reform. And so I was invited with a couple of others, investment bankers who were literate in science. And that's just led to a whole series of relationships and ways of thinking and opportunities to write. And one of the books I wrote, which was a major project particularly during the time when I was not doing Closer to Truth, after the first few episodes, where I wrote the biography of the former president of China, Jiang Zemin. And that sort of was a key factor in my getting well known in China and other opportunities. And so I take that very seriously. I try to do the best I can. It's difficult in today's world to be able to tell an unbiased story about China because it's such a difficult and sensitive subject. But I have tried to, both through the video and writings, tell my views, which are not the views of the Chinese, and it's not the views of those American politicians who are anti-China. Everybody has issues. I try to deal with topics in things that I know personally, and in what I believe is an objective fashion. But it is difficult in today's world to be objective about topics that are emotional. China being one, there are obviously other issues as well. But as I said, it's what I'd call a grafted-on passion that was almost not by choice, but just by circumstance. where it's closer to truth and its content is very an intrinsic, lifelong passion.
Looks like you have a book for that topic, though. You won several awards. How much time did you spend there?
Well, in some years I was there. I mean, just a few years. Almost 50% of the time. Most years, from I don't know if I had a guess, from 2000 to 2018, right before the pandemic. I was probably there on average 25 or 30% of the time. I never lived there, but I made many, many trips. And in the process, table tennis became my primary avocation. So that still remains. I still play 2 or 3 times a week, even if I'm working hard, and I have lots of coaches from all different nationalities, and they work me hard. I said, pretend I'm 19, and I'm trying to train for the local, the state team, and work me hard. So that's how I stay in shape.
That's admirable. We won't discuss your age, but you've got a few years even on me. I'm 73. And if you can still do that, I am now more than green with envy. That's absolutely amazing.
No, I take that seriously. 2-hour sessions and, almost nonstop.
Wow.
I'm careful not to chase balls that you might hurt yourself, and so I'm careful. And whenever I'm going, my wife reminds me that you're really not 19, so be careful.
I was looking up your bio, and I saw Johns Hopkins University, and I couldn't help but notice their motto is "The truth shall set you free." And then I thought about your program. Was that an influence on the title, or is that just a coincidence?
I didn't even realize that. It wasn't an influence, but it has some nice historical resonance. So thank you for the the correlations. Who knows? It's Carl Jung with his synchronicity. How there's all these connections that we don't think about. I'm not sure how true that is, but it's kind of fun to think about.
Since your basic degree is in human biology, I'm going to throw you off a half a second here. Have you done anything, or have you discussed AI with any of your many, many important guests?
Yeah, AI is an important topic. What we don't do is try to be the technology reporting of what's going on right now. What are the new discoveries? Because there are a dozen really eminent scientific publications that cover that really well, and they all have daily reports and all of that. So that's not what Closer to Truth is. But what Closer to Truth is dealing with the philosophical and even theological, if it makes sense, implications. And with AI, what is an important issue in the world, but which we believe is not being understood properly, is the nature of AI consciousness. It is pretty much an assumption of what I call the techno-optimists in Silicon Valley and the equivalents around the world, that at some point AI will be conscious, and that brings up a whole series of moral and other even scary human existence kind of questions. And what we say is that the assumption being made is that once you have greater complexity in a certain kind of structure, not just pure complexity of adding more and more CPUs of even a specialized kind, but at some point the belief is that it's inevitable that AI will become conscious, and what does that mean, and how do we control it, or what are the rights and obligations, and a whole series of issues. And those are legitimate issues, but we ask what we believe is an earlier question: is that the case? Is consciousness of the nature that a physical system alone, given all the complexities and structures that would need to be, given all that, but is that sufficient by itself? And we don't give, I don't give, and a definitive answer to that. But what we do is to show that the question itself is much more challenging and much more and has much more substance and depth than people give it credit for. And so that's the closer to truth question. And we have dealt with that, and we will dealt with that. We will deal with that more. The paper, which I call a paper, which is the size of a book, that will be published very soon, deals with that question very strongly. So it is a high concern. And my sense is that most people are not thinking about it in the right way.
Cosmos, life, consciousness. You've done a lot of topics. What's your favorite? Is there any one topic or any one program that you would like to put forefront as part of your biography?
The way I like to answer that question is I have 3 children. The children, they're in their 50s. And if you ask me which one I like better, what would I say?
Yeah. Good answer.
And so the answer is that every program I work on, every single one, all now 330, whatever, and more to come, I treat as if it's the most important thing in the world when I'm working on it. And I really believe it. And I put my whole life and soul into each program and to work through it. I work with my partner on Closer to Truth, who is the co-creator, director, producer, and director, Peter Getzels. And when I write the script, and he takes it and works it into a visual creation. It's the original script is longer than the program, so he and his team, his editors, craft it and making it shorter. And we go back and forth on the script. So it's very much a very creative and dynamic process that Peter and I work on together when crafting the shows from the raw interviews that we have. As you may know, Closer to Truth has really 2 primary formats. One format are the television shows, which are the so-called crown jewel. That's what we work on. Peter and I work on very intensely together. And each one is a high focus. I mean, it'll take a year for each show, from the time we shoot the interview to getting the transcripts, to doing the first draft, to doing multiple drafts, to doing the edit, to adding the music and the what we call interstitials, my commentaries. Then we do voiceovers, and then there's quality production. Huge amount of effort. And each one is treated as if it's like the only thing we're doing. And once it's done and out of mind and on to the next. And it's been a wonderful process. So that's the first thing. The second thing we have, which is a very important resource, are the raw interviews. That's when we'll interview some expert or leading scientist or Nobel Prize winner, and the session usually runs 3 or 4 hours, and we break it into anywhere from 8 to 15 questions. Normally it's about 10 or 12. Each one is about 8 to 10 minutes, and we have those, and those are on our website, closertotruth.com.
Nice.
And our YouTube channel. And those are raw. And if I make a mistake or slur a word, we let it go. If there's a technical problem or the interviewee says, "Look, I made a mistake," we'll edit that out. But that's the raw material. We have about 5,000 of those over the 25 years. And so those are the 2 products that we have. The raw interviews, and I prepare very strongly and very long for each one. I mean, when I go into an interview, for a half day or 3-4 hours with somebody, I've read their books, I've thought about it, and I take that very, very seriously, the preparation. Now we're doing a lot of those online as well. But then when we do the television shows, of that, say, 10-minute interview, we'll pick the best 3 minutes. And then in the 27 minutes or so that we have for our half-hour show that at WQLN, we're very pleased to broadcast, we'll have anywhere from 4 to 6 interviews, and we weave that into a story. And that's a very careful selection of that raw 10-minute interview into the kind of the core aspects for, the 3 minutes or so for each person.
It's an astounding career. I was going to ask, what are your plans for the next few years? But I have a feeling your agenda is full. On the other hand, do you have any?
It's full. As long as I have time to play table tennis.
Do you have any one item that you would like to do? Something that may be further down the road?
That's a good question. I think right now I have a high focus on consciousness. Because of this very significant paper that I've just written. It's still in its publishing process. I would like to. It's an academic paper. It'll be widely available, but it won't be. It'll be at a more technical level than Closer to Truth. I do want to turn that into a popular or semi-popular book. That's on the agenda, and
there you go.
Yeah. And to focus more on broader approaches to the thinking about consciousness, and particularly looking to other cultures for diverse kinds of understanding. We're certainly very sensitive to issues of diversity, and the primary aspect of diversity that we look to are diversity of ideas. Certainly you want diversity in gender, ethnicity, religion, race. I mean, those are things that are social advances that we're sensitive to and want to be more sensitive to. But the most important diversity is diversity of ideas. And so in the area of consciousness, I think that'll be a little bit more of our focus in terms of reaching popular audiences in the future, and particularly from a global point of view.
You and I both know none of this happens without supporters. You have some outstanding ones. The John Templeton Foundation, the Templeton Religious Trust, a well-known name, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, Templeton World, and of course your own foundation. As you and I know, without these people, and of course members, and of course your listeners and your viewers and your fans, so to speak, none of this would be possible.
Well, that's true. We're very grateful for those who have supported us, and not just the foundations that have given us grants to do specific projects, but the listeners and and those people who write to us are very much appreciated, and the foundations appreciates that as well. So everybody is a participant. It's a journey we take together because we don't have the truth. What we have is a sense of who in the world we should listen to get different approaches to the truth on different kinds of subjects. And so it's Closer to Truth is really a joint program that we look upon that is very interactive with our listeners, and people are very free with their comments in today's world, whether it's comment feedback to our website or whether it's people watch the show and have different opinions, or on YouTube, and we appreciate everything. I mean, every feedback. It's not always accolades and roses. People have complaints about this or that we should have come to this or that conclusion, which we didn't. But we listened to all of that. I'm really pleased, though, that in recent years, whereas we started 100% in the U.S., naturally, because that's where PBS is, and some in Canada, it's now from our website and YouTube channel, more than 50% is outside the U.S. And so India, for example, is our third largest market, Canada being second. Fourth. UK is second, Canada's third, and India is now fourth. And very sophisticated comments coming from many avid listeners in India. So we're pleased to see the increasing globalization, although, of course, PBS is our original and first home.
First of all, I'd like to invite everyone to go to closertotruth.com. Don't miss that. That's an outstanding resource for folks that are great fans of yours, new or over the years. And secondly, thank you for taking time. I know your schedule is incredibly busy. I just wanted to say we truly appreciate your visit today.
Well, I've enjoyed it very much, and we wouldn't be where we are without loyal stations like WQLN, and your support, Tom, is really an inspiration to us because, as I said, it's quite lonely work.
Yes.
Thousands of hours in the wee hours of the night, worrying about every word to try to make it right, and to know that it's appreciated is a great, frankly, inspiration for us.
Welcome to We Question and Learn. This is your host, Tom Pies. We're celebrating our 20th year on the air here, and every once in a while, we do something a little bit different. And I got to confess, this one might be a bit self-motivated, but it's directed at the concept of, let's say, radio, before there were radio sets. And I have on the phone with me Dan Figurelli. And Dan is an audio preservation engineer. So you're the audio preservation engineer for the Indiana University campus at Bloomington. Am I right? Great.
That's correct.
Yeah, what an honor to talk to you. How long have you been there?
Just about 9 years now.
Okay. Before we go too far and assume folks know exactly what the project is, you preserve Edison cylinders.
That's correct.
And so that the younger folks understand, prior to the Edison records, these came on looks like a small can of dog food. You know what I mean? What are they, about 5 inches tall, maybe a couple inches around?
Yeah. And for people to get some kind of a visual idea, imagine a piece of toilet paper, cardboard roll.
Yep.
About a similar size to that, made out of a wax-like material that is both very fragile, but also soft enough to be able to cut a groove into it, and that's how things are made.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because a lot of our folks enjoy jazz and blues recordings, and they still play the albums here. So this is basically a record. It has a groove in it around the cylinder from one end to the other, and the device is a small wooden box. There's no plastic in here. This is all metal, a leather strap, I believe, a nice wind-up clock-type mechanism, a crank, and a little rubber hose that hooks to a needle that runs against the cylinder, and a giant horn. So I think people can imagine that. The ads they probably have seen is the little dog, the little Nipper RCA dog, listening to his master's voice, which Thomas Edison didn't like that concept. He didn't like the dog concept. So going back to what you do, how did it all start? What provoked you, the university, your team to start preserving Edison cylinders?
Well, IU has been collecting cylinders since back in the 1940s. They have a very large archive of that goes back to cylinders, early discs, aluminum discs, and so on through the formats. But they've had a large collection of cylinders going back to like the 40s and 50s, and they've just been adding to that collection as the years go by. A lot of these cylinders can be kind of separated into two groups. One is the commercial cylinders that were popular songs that were sold, and then the other one is the brown wax cylinders, which would be the equivalent to like a blank CD these days, where it's like there's nothing on there. And so IU had over 7,000 original brown wax cylinders that were collected from all over North America, ranging from the 1890s to about 1920s.
So people understand this. This actually, I won't call it beeswax, but it is a wax coating on, let's call it a little mini can of dog food, but it's made of a cardboard or a Bakelite material under the wax, or was that all wax?
That's correct. There could be a little bit of a cardboard underneath there that kind of holds the cylinder shape, and then a kind of metallic-y soap type composite, which makes up the wax.
So for folks that remember the old 45s, they would turn gray after you played them a dozen times. Did these last very long? How did that work out as far as a consumer or even just a professional using one?
They've held up incredibly well for being over 100 years old. The brown wax cylinders can be very fragile if they're not handled properly. They're susceptible to humidity and temperature changes and things like that, and they can be fragile as an egg if they're kind of mishandled. But if they're stored properly and they're in good conditions, they can last 125 years. And when you play them with put a stylus on them and start playing them, they sound incredibly good for being that old.
In my hand, I'm holding an Edison record, the original record on the cardboard cylinder. Thomas A. Edison's image was on all of these, as you probably know. 1907, Orange, New Jersey, and then the next version up was the Edison Gold Molded. Looks the same, but has a better name. Came out the next year. I guess what I'm saying is, after the wax cylinders were the format, what happened next? How did they graduate to the type of cylinders people may have seen or are purchasing online, i.e. collectors trying to find these?
They as he would patent a certain type of cylinder, there'd be a certain type of composite that he would use for that particular wax. And as the years went on, he refined the composites, basically, and then it kind of graduated to an amberol, which is more of a plastic type of material.
Yes.
And those were used primarily for the commercial releases. And the difference between those and brown wax is that these were molded. So basically they would make a master copy,
right,
and then they would press them with these amberol cylinders so they can mass produce them.
I remember reading about vaudeville actors coming into a studio. They would set up 6 machines, each that would record on wax, and the poor performer would have to record 6 at a time into one microphone, so to speak, and had to do that many times over in order to have enough recordings to either sell or distribute. Am I close? Is that an accurate portrayal of what they used to do?
Yeah, you could have the same song. It might have a different matrix number. So, it might have a letter A or a letter B or something like that at the end of it, which would indicate a second performance of a song. And, however many takes they may have done for something like that, we don't know which ones have survived over the years. And so it can be kind of interesting to say, hey, I got 2 cylinders here of the same song. They sound different.
So you folks are in Bloomington, you're on campus. Do you have your own archival studio? Obviously, you mentioned a library. Can you paint a picture of what your work environment is like there?
Sure. Yeah, we're located here in Bloomington, Indiana, and I have a preservation studio that allows me to digitize cylinders, aluminum discs, lacquer discs, open reel tapes, even up to cassettes and DATs and CDs and things like that. And so basically it's a studio that's acoustically treated, so you're not influenced by anything else going outside the room, and that is basically so we can hear as accurately as possible. When you're playing a stylus over grooves, you have to make sure that you're not skipping a groove or mistracking in any sort of way. So accuracy is very important. And so it's a room that's acoustically treated and isolated, so I can sit there and listen to cylinders all day. And over the years, we've digitized over 7,000 of these brown wax cylinders.
I admire your tenacity. That takes a lot of patience because nothing works perfectly each time either.
That's right.
Now, I have about 3 of these. One of my earlier ones is 1903. I didn't get to get a pre-1900 one with the headphones that are plastic tubing, so to speak, where you put those in your ears like a doctor's stethoscope. But as I record them, I literally put a very expensive microphone in the horn and run them that way. So what I'm hearing is what's really coming out of the machine. You may have a better way, I'm sure, a better way to do it. What is your procedure for recording, say, an Edison cylinder?
So we had to decide the best way to digitize these cylinders back in 2017. And so we tried 3 or 4 different modern cylinder playback devices, and we basically compared the results and ultimately went with one called the Endpoint Cylinder Machine. And this is made by Nick Berg, who is out in Burbank, California.
Yeah.
So Nick designed this modern cylinder machine that is basically a modern mandrel that spins and has a laser that basically points at the cylinder and gives you precise measurements as to how to make adjustments and correct for wow and flutter and wobbly cylinders and things like that. And it gives you an incredibly accurate digital signal that you can digitize. And basically we make 2496 wave files directly off of that machine.
That's absolutely fantastic, because as I look at my cylinder here, you can purchase diamond needle tips that go in literally a diaphragm, as you know. The diaphragm just runs out a hose into a giant horn. So you've actually worked with this gentleman. You purchased or you use, this thing looks like a little metal frame with a motor running the cylinder. Am I close? Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you're using not a needle, but you're actually doing a digital. So that's not much different than a CD player when you think about it. You're reading the data off the CD, but you're reading the groove and translating it into audio. Actually,
it can function as both. So
really?
There is a tone arm similar to how you would play a record. So there's a tone arm with a stylus at the end of it. And so we are actually putting a stylus on the cylinder as it spins. And so we are getting the direct sound of the grooves from the stylus. But there's a laser mounted underneath that tone arm, which basically is taking physical measurements between itself and the cylinder. Which allows you to kind of compensate for any sort of physical discrepancies. But that laser will also give you an optical transfer as well.
Real memory in your computer that you can manipulate and modify.
That's right. And so you can imagine if you have a cylinder that's very dirty or has lots of cracks and things like that, maybe a stylus isn't the best thing to try to play that back. You could do the laser playback and you get some pretty good results with this machine.
This is a question that I'd like to ask. How does this get funded? Did the university decide this was an important project?
They did decide that they wanted to digitize these cylinders, and they wanted to digitize basically everything that was on campus. That was a format that was becoming more and more obsolete. And so back in 2013, IU was awarded a grant from the National Endowments of Humanities. And so basically it was a large grant-funded project to digitize everything on IU's campuses. And so that's how we purchased this equipment and built these studios. And we digitized over 350,000 objects in that grant.
Okay, that explains how the $250,000 number came from the university over in California. Now, so that people understand, this was just not a willy-nilly, let's spend a bunch of money recording old records. These have a huge historical value. There are important voices. There are voices that we will never ever hear, obviously never hear again, that have social value to say, what year, how far back do you go?
Exactly. A lot of the original brown wax cylinders came from collections from Edward Curtis, who took lots of famous photographs, and he also recorded cylinders in his travels. They sound incredible for being as old as they are. Unlike a lot of commercial releases, those types of recordings have to be cleared to be actually heard by the public and things like that. So you have to go through rights, and you have to work with the people who actually own the cylinders to clear any sort of legal issues and things like that.
So they're not in the public the public domain just because they're old or were never copyrighted. There was probably no copyright law back then. You still have to manage protecting I would call the legal aspect of the recording. I would have thought these things are in the public domain. How would you even go back to find someone who had recorded something in 1920 even, or even say 1890, 1900? How could you manage the rights on something like that? Someone owns these by virtue of owning the recording, that is the cylinder?
Yeah, so you can trace who owns these recordings down to the collection that they were originally part of. Say they were donated to IU or something like that. You can kind of trace the origin that far back. And then there is some level of paper documentation as to where these come from. But you also have to kind of be a little bit of a detective and figure out, okay, well, where was this made? When was this made? And so each one is kind of a little unique as far as going back and trying to figure out who actually owns it. But as far as today, a lot of ownership of these cylinders actually belongs to the people that were being recorded. So if it was a tribe out in the Southwest, they would own the rights to this content and material. And of course, we would have to clear anything with them for anything to be heard or anything like that by the public. And a lot of people choose to just keep it private, which is their right.
So in essence, if you record something to maintain in your library just for educational purposes, you're not really selling these on the commercial market or making money, so to speak, on them. But you can archive things, but to resell them, that's where the rights issues come in, right?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily about reselling anything. It's more about providing an archive for research and for knowledge. And if somebody wanted to research something like this, there are certain channels you can go through, and you can ask certain people if you can get permissions to hear something or do a research project on something like that. But each one is kind of catered to the individual who may have responsibility for the recording collection.
You and I were teasing prior via email about a vaudevillian character who you could look up online. Uncle Josh, and I have a bunch of his cylinders. They're strictly 2 and 4 minute comedic stretches. You have to listen carefully, and some of the references relative to even the English language, like table manners and different common phrases, it was almost difficult to understand, not from the audio, but what the heck was he talking about? And you mentioned that you had a group of those vaudeville type, even Uncle Josh cylinders. Yeah,
I've had to transfer more Uncle Josh cylinders that I can count. And there's a lot of situations. It was almost like a comedy recording, and it's like Uncle Josh goes to the barber shop.
Yes.
Uncle Josh goes to New York. Uncle Josh goes to a baseball game. That kind of thing.
I had one where you went to dinner and didn't know what the finger bowl was.
Yeah.
And that's not funny because I know people today that do not know what finger bowls are. Yeah. So physically, do you do a lot of this work yourself? Do you have a team? How does this work?
Yeah, we have a team of people. Basically, there's been a lot of work that is put into curation and preparation of these cylinders. They are each cylinder is in its own box that basically holds it kind of in the center, so it's not touching the edges. They're bar-coded. They're grouped into collections, and they've been entered into a database already. And so these are all things that happen before they come to my studio. And so we have a team of people that are responsible for that. We have myself and another engineer that did a lot of these transfers. And then we have people that are doing quality control of the digital files and more curation, adding metadata to the files and things like that. And so we have quite a team that all chip in for this work.
We don't want to break radio listeners' hearts, but the music stations are all on a hard drive with metadata and these kinds of tags, and you're bringing the old Edison cylinders and other recordings into the 21st century. Now, help me out. Do you have the records, the Edison one-sided records as well, and anything subsequent? Do you work on those kinds of projects?
I've had some of those in the past. I couldn't recall any off the top of my head of which ones they may have been, but we've done plenty of the shellacs, the early Berliner discs, and then going into like aluminum discs and lacquers, stretching into the 1930s and 40s. We've done quite a few discs for that were the Orson Welles radio broadcasts,
fantastic.
Mercury Theater on the air, and so an hour-long radio program that did Around the World in 80 Days or Sherlock Holmes or War of the Worlds.
I was going to ask you, did you get War of the Worlds too?
Yeah, we did.
That's great.
And we had the first disc that we had, the first 5 minutes or so, there was a crack in it, and so we actually went to some lengths to get that optically transferred. Wonderful. And so basically to kind of rescue that content off the disc that was broken.
I've seen some speeches recorded, and these were done on giant records, maybe 3 or 4 feet across.
About the 16-inch lacquer discs.
These are much larger. The diameter, not the radius, the diameter was almost 3 feet. They were huge, and they were transcription records. I've only seen one in my life, and it came with the original turntable that it had to be played on, and I've never seen one since. So I'm just asking if you've run across typically World War II transcriptions.
You mentioned the World War II era. We do have some recordings that were like radio drives and fundraisers and things like that. And that was part of the Orson Welles collection. And those lacquer discs that were cut in those times usually had an aluminum base with a lacquer coating on top, so you can cut the grooves into the lacquer coating. But during that time, there was an aluminum drive. And so in that era, they used glass base for the discs. And so you can imagine how fragile that they are during that time. But we've come across quite a few of those.
Physically, how much space do you have? Do you have a whole series of rooms? You have a recording studio, obviously. How do you store everything?
We have a couple of different locations for that. The building where we actually do the transfers is basically set up for audio and video. We're able to do video formats as well. But the actual material, the physical items, are stored at a different location, temperature controlled storage facility that that is humidity control and fire prevention and all that good stuff.
So you have movie projectors as well?
We did have a film a department that digitized all the films that IU has, yes.
That's phenomenal. Extremely impressive. How long does your grant last, or is this something the university will keep running as long as there's opportunity to archive important recordings?
Yeah, the grant did end in 2020, and we've been going ever since. So we are essentially part of IU Libraries. And we are still digitizing. There's still content that IU has in their collection that needs to be digitized, and there's still things coming in. And a lot of the, the notice that this project, has gotten from people, people that maybe just hearing about it for the first time, they're contacting us saying, "Hey, I have these, amazing collections. What do I do with them?" And so it keeps going.
And amateurs like myself who think they can archive these kinds of things practically, it can be done, but obviously you have the technology, the ability to communicate with people who develop, say, Edison cylinder players. Now, are there more than one, or did you just choose the best to accomplish your project?
We did choose the endpoint cylinder. There are other modern cylinder playback devices out there, as well as optical ways of transferring these without touching them with an actual stylus. And yeah, these modern cylinder players have come a long way in recent years. So we're lucky enough to have a team of experts, that all come together for a project like this.
If someone has a collection or has a question, or better yet, they may want to make a donation of some recordings, how can they find you?
You can find me at IU Bloomington Libraries. My name is Dan Figurelli, and you can reach me there. Also, we have quite a big department that works with the libraries, and we're happy to provide consultations for people with collections or digitization needs, and try to provide any kind of information we can.
How can people find you online?
You can go to the IU Libraries website, and you can find my email there.
And this is on the Indiana University Bloomington website, right?
That's right.
Great. And if they have a question or some way they can help, that would be great. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to chat with us. It's certainly a different but very, very interesting topic. It's nice to see history being preserved, and not just the recording and the technology, but I have to believe there's a lot of good content and entertainment that probably would be very enjoyable and very educational to listen to today. Dan, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me.